Good evening, everyone. I'll declare the meeting open at 6:02, and I'll just note tonight that I'm standing in for Mayor Emma Cole, who's on a short leave of absence, and we'll come to the apologies in a moment. On behalf of the City of Vincent, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I just also need to let everyone know that for members of the gallery that the meeting will be live streamed over the internet, and I further advise that we take all care to preserve the privacy of all of the members of the gallery, and therefore public question time is not streamed and the cameras do not capture the public gallery, so you don't have to worry about being on camera tonight. So, apologies and members on leave of absence. We have Mayor Emma Cole, who's on approved leave of absence from 7th of July to the 17th of July, and Councillor Buckles, who's on approved leave of absence from 3rd of July to the 15th of July, and everyone else is here. So we're going to start with public question time and receiving of public statements, and I'll just let people know who haven't done this before, you've got 3 minutes. So when you come up to the microphone, if you let us know your name and your address, please, and also let us know the item number which you're going to be speaking about. We do keep it strictly to 3 minutes, so please don't be offended if we keep you to time, and also just to let you know that we're not going to be able to engage in discussion or debate on the item, but we may provide responses either at the time or during the debate during the evening. Okay, so who would like to come up? Or leave of absence?
Through you, Madam Presiding Member, no, we do not have any applications for leave of absence, nor receipt of petitions, deputations or presentations, and unless you have any announcements by the presiding member.
No declarations of interest?
No, I've not received any.
Okay. No, I have no specific announcements. I think it's best that we get on with going through the agenda. So I will call item 8.1 and ask for a mover and a seconder. Mover, Councillor Loden, sorry. And seconded, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I make a comment on this, just wanted to ask a couple of questions, if I could, through the chair. The first one was around what are the risks associated with this approval, although it is time limited, if once TPS2 was determined and the city was then to refuse it, is there any risks associated with that decision based on us now making a decision to allow for a 1-year extension?
Through the chair, council granting approval, a time-limited approval, would not be a concession that the use is appropriate beyond that time limit. It would simply allow the planning framework to be finalised, and it's not considered there be any risk associated with issuing a time-limited approval at this time, and certainly no further risk than the decision council made in May in relation to a separate application to amend the condition by extending that previous approval by 12 months.
Thank you. My second question was around the comments from the floor around this being considered a new DA, so a greenfield development rather than a time extension as we previously reviewed in May. I was wondering if you could provide some comment on the argument posed from the floor as well.
Through the presiding member, the application is a new, fresh application, unlike the previous application considered by Councillor May, which was an amendment to a condition to extend the time, well, to the application at that time was also to seek permanent approval. Both applications were required to be considered against all of the standards and requirements of the EPRA scheme, its policies, and everything else that's set out in the regulations. So both assessments were undertaken in the same way, were required to be undertaken in the same way, and council is required to have the same to give regard to the same matters and same issues as the previous application. It is a different application, but those differences are largely technical differences. The essence of the argument and the issues between the two applications and the crux of the matters to be considered are the same.
And then my final question was just, I'm guessing we don't have this information, but do we know how much of the concrete is delivered to the city?
Through the presiding member, no, we don't have that information. It is something that's relevant for the strategic planning framework. I don't consider it to be a relevant issue for these individual development applications, which need to be based on the merits of the proposal rather than the strategic nature of the development. But it is a relevant consideration for the scheme.
Thank you. So I note there's an amendment on this item that I imagine someone will discuss shortly. But from my perspective, this development is not in keeping with what we want to see happening in this community. I recognise that there are people that are employed in this space that may live in the city of Vincent, but this location, with its location right next to Claysbrook train station and the emerging development that's already happening in that area, it's clearly a key place to see that we want to see transition. But I feel that once we do need to wait until TPS2 is determined, and that is a critical piece that we have been waiting for a number of years, and hopefully we will see that determined quickly, so that we can figure out a long-term way forward for this particular site. So I am supportive of the officer recommendation, but I'll listen to the debate as well.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Look, I think Vincent has consistently stated a position which sees the transition of this plant and the other under consideration tonight away from their current location in the near to medium term. I'm somewhat frustrated that we are in this position again, where the absence of sign-off on our strategic planning framework means that the city, the residents and indeed the applicants are still operating without the certainty that finalising our scheme will bring. I don't think, though, that this means that it's an indication that it's appropriate for these plants to remain in situ in perpetuity. In my view, it's completely incompatible with the vision for the locality, and I believe that without an exit strategy, we're unlikely to see the investment that will bring life to the area and make the most of its potential. I would like to acknowledge everyone that's spoken tonight and taken part in this process again. I'm hopeful that the resolution you seek will come soon and that this will support the removal of the plants from these sites. As Councillor Loden has said, I understand that there's an amendment that may be put before us, and I would be supportive of, making sure that we are completely clear that a time-limited approval is in no way an indication that we would be considering an approval beyond the end of the time limit, and that we are still certain that we have a vision for this area, nestled in amongst our stadiums, as we've heard tonight, a great site for transport-oriented design and on the doorstep to the city. So I will leave it at that for now and listen to the rest of the debate.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Topperberg.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Mayor, just a question through you to the Director of Development Services, just for clarity. Essentially, if you look at, so Advice Note 10 talks about the condition 1 being a time-limited approval to enable the local planning framework, town planning scheme number 2 to be finalised. The city's last submission, or what we, and I'll talk to it in a moment, but ultimately what we have submitted previously to the Minister actually calls for, or to the Planning Commission, is for that date to cease on October 2017. Just if we can just get some clarity from you about the likely view in an appeal or otherwise where we have a submission which effectively is is a refusal, which currently sits in the scheme, because I'm assuming this scheme won't be gazetted in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So if we're relying on what's proposed in the scheme, and we've got the proposal here to approve the fresh application with for a time period of effectively 16 months, just if we can get some clarity from you as to why the officers decided that was the best way forward, and why there's no reference to potentially an exit strategy. It is just effectively waiting for a third party to make a decision about the scheme.
Through the Deputy Mayor, the recommendation and that the time-limited approval that's recommended, the 12 months, is based solely on the fact that the strategic planning framework is still yet to be determined and is still extremely uncertain, given the opposing views that were put by the Minister when the scheme was advertised, which was to allow the concrete batching plants, and the position that was put by Council, which was not to allow the concrete batching plants. So the 12 months is simply to allow that framework to be finalised. It's not a time frame by which the city has considered the plants could be relocated or shut down. It's certainly not being considered. It's simply about whether or not the planning framework will be finalised, at which time the concrete batching plants will either be required to shut down because the use will become prohibited, or there might be a particular period of time set out in the new scheme by which the plants could operate until they have shut down, in which case a further planning application may be lodged and considered in accordance with TPS2.
Thank you. I've been, I suppose, intimately involved with this for the 7 and a bit years that I've been sitting in this chamber, and I've read lots and lots of things going back and forth, and I say this with the utmost respect to the applicants, to the representatives, to the ministers who've made decisions previously. It's an absolute farce. It really is. If you want to look at the strategic document that's referred to as to why both I know we're only referring to one at the moment, but why both plants should be there. So when you read, I'm having a look here in the sub-regional overview, part whatever it is, so it talks about the competing uses, and it uses the example of the conflict between competing uses as the batching plants, and it says the local authorities wish to have the batching plants relocated to enable urban zoning to occur and subsequent residential development to take place. However, there's an important need for industrial land to be located within close proximity to the city and located adjacent to primary arterial routes. So that all sounds like something that potentially makes sense in a broad strategic sense. When you look back at the executive summary, and it talks about some of the pressures, and it talks about the constant threat from residential encroachment, gives the batching plants as an example, it also refers to the fact that these the key industry stakeholders expressed the following issues for the land and development. It's quite clear from what's presented there that there is absolutely a strategic advantage to these two businesses for being located in that location, and good luck to them, and they've been there for a long period of time, and there was probably a lengthy period of time where it was appropriate. Just returned from Melbourne recently. If you look at what's happened in the Docklands over the last 20 years and otherwise, there are a number of competing uses, and it's not about gentrification. It's more broadly about the evolution and the strategic change of direction as these uses compete. The idea on land holding of that size, that for the number of employees that work on those sites, that we should somehow be protecting those sites when we have potential to bring hundreds, if not thousands of people to have jobs on those sites, is just ludicrous and is not a valid argument. We would be asked to reject that as an argument for any other use, and I think it's completely unfair to talk about that as the human aspect. Absolutely, uncertainty is an issue for any landowner, for any business, and for any employee, but I don't think it's fair to present an argument of the employment that these facilities offer. The other thing that I just cannot understand is, if you look at the timeline of events, we were asked as a council to review our planning scheme. That was underway for, I think, 7 years, up until we actually decided we wanted to send it for advertising. So in December of 2011, we requested permission for it to go to advertising. The decision from that time and from prior to the 2012 decision, nothing that has ever come from this chamber, from staff or council, has been any different, and it's been abundantly clear. We respect that they have a right to exist currently, and we respect that they have been operating largely within the planning conditions that have been set. The complaints register is a testament to that. There is no question that the concrete batching plants have been good corporate citizens in terms of the framework in which they've been operating. But what has been presented consistently, this is not the desire of this community for the long-term future. It is ludicrous. You have 2 stadiums on either side. You have 2 train stations within walking distance. You can walk to the GPO in under 20 minutes from that site. If you were to talk about it being Greenfield's application, any planner who was to take a third-party view without knowing what was on the ground would say this area, given the relatively speaking, depressed land values compared to other areas within an urban area, is absolutely ripe for development. It's completely inconceivable to me. I might have to apply to speak for longer because I think I'm probably getting close to my 5
I
minutes.
may grant it.
Oh, you can't, they have to. All right, so I'll need...
Can I have a vote, please, to extend time? Thank you. Mover and a seconder, sorry. Mover, Susie, thank you. Seconder, Jonathan.
Fine. So appreciate, and I do appreciate it. So if you just take a look at the potential value that these have to the broader Perth community as not just as development sites, but the other thing is if you take the EPRA scheme, which has been in place for, I think we're pushing 20 years now, give or take, you're able to build within this area 10 to 12 storey development. We've seen at best a handful of developments. If you take a look at the most recent one is the corner of Lord Street, which was alluded to earlier, which is a 7 and 6 storey development. There's been some amazing approvals through there. There's been some, and I might add, a lot of that has been even prior to the DAP process existing through this council and this chamber, where there was community opposition to it. But largely, this council and the City of Vincent has recognised the value of that area in the Claysbrook North area to provide a potential boom for all types of development. I do take a bit of an issue with the comment made earlier that to be developed into a cafe precinct. I don't think that's what we are looking for. I think if you look in around Gladstone Street especially, there are a number of what I would refer to as light industrial uses, mechanics workshop, those sorts of things that are essential services within community. But largely, whether they have had the approvals or otherwise, developers have made it very clear, as has this council, that we will not see a change in that area, and the broader benefit to the state won't be realised while the concrete batching plants are there. And I think that if you look at the process that we've gone through in terms of our strategic planning and the fact that we've had this, and this is why I do say it's been a farce, we wanted to go to advertising with the concrete batching plants not being there or having their use ceased at the date which was previously determined. We were told we had to go to advertising, recognising their use, which we did. We then went back to the Minister and said, no, we've gone to advertising, the community don't want it, we don't want it, we've been quite explicit about why. And other than those 2 statements that sit in the EEL strategy, I haven't seen anywhere where there's been an argument made that their strategic value is of such significance to the state that it overrides any of those decisions. And let's be honest, if that was the case, there would never have been a 5-year approval. That would have been approved by the Minister the last time or the time before in perpetuity. So we have this rolling back and forth, and the uncertainty is horrific, both for the batching plants and for the community. And I just think that it's very difficult to actually come up with the right decision here in terms of, because the refusal would ultimately, no doubt, end up in SAT, and likely, given the events of the last 6 months in terms of what's gone back and forth, we would likely be subject to, or potentially to, there are risks associated for the city and for the community in terms of making that argument, given that they do have an existing approval, and we did make that decision in relation to the time extension. But I'm absolutely at a loss as to why, for everybody, we are even in these circumstances, because I just think it's farcical. I think that the concrete batching plants, if it was essential for them to be in that location, we would not see the 40 or 50 batching plants that we see in and around driving distance of Western Australia. It only takes a 2-second Google search to look at Wholesome, Hanson, Boral, BGC, have a look at the sort of work that they do, where they do it and where they choose to batch their concrete, and they're all able to exist in a competitive market. I get the strategic advantage, but it provides no strategic benefit to the state, and I don't think that argument has been made here or at the SAT in any of the previous 4 or 5 times we've had this debate. So I appreciate the indulgence, but to that end I will move the amendment that is on the pink, which, if I can get a seconder, I'll talk to it very briefly.
There a seconder? Councillor Gontaszewski? Sorry, Jonathan, I can't actually see you. This chair's brick.
Okay, so essentially, what this amendment proposes is to make sure that it doesn't change any of the actual substance of the decision, but it actually provides reasons that there. And this did come at late notice. I appreciate the efforts of the staff, and there's perhaps some wording in there that I would have differed with, but the principle is I'm comfortable with. But effectively, it provides the reasons as part of the decision. It provides our reasons, which means in the event that this decision or any part of it is actually appealed, the entire decision will actually reflect those reasons rather than being contained within the report. And I think that is critical, so that we are sure that we don't get confused about potentially an approval and the time limitation having been for reasons other than what's stated here. So, considering the late distribution, would you like me to read it? Is that probably for benefit, I think, of the plans as well? So I'll do that briefly. So the amendment, as I say, it lists the reasons. So reason A, the development approval granted for the concrete batching plant on 20 May 2012 does not guarantee or contemplate the continued operation of the plant beyond 16 October 2017, despite these circumstances allowing only the finite existence of the concrete batching plant and requiring its imminent cessation October 2017. The applicant has advised they have not considered relocation of the concrete batching plants elsewhere and instead appears to be relying on an expectation of ongoing approval. This undermines and ignores the bona fide impact and intent of the pre-existing development approval. Notwithstanding, it's considered fair and reasonable for Council to grant an extension of time to allow the long-term planning framework of the area to be finalised through adoption of the City of Vincent Draft TPS2, under which Council has consistently resolved that the subject site and its surrounds must be zoned residential commercial R160. The continued ongoing operation of the concrete batching plant on the subject site is entirely inconsistent with and detrimental to the City's future vision for the Claysbrook precinct to transition to a mixed-use area and the community's zoning and development expectations for the area. And reason B, the continued operation of the concrete batching plant on the subject site is entirely incompatible and detrimental to the existing and emerging residential and mixed-use development character and intensity of the area, as evidenced by recent development. That should read assessment, not approval. Development assessment panel decisions in support of high density development of that nature in close proximity to the subject site. So I will just speak to that very briefly. FAST Chapter 3 was the fact that we were also told last time when we wanted to send the scheme for advertising that there needed to be a residential exclusion zone around the batching plants, which had never previously existed. And I found it completely absurd that you would have plants that would, at the time of seeking approval, would be making a planning argument that they had no impact and that all the dust was controlled on site, that the traffic was manageable, the noise, etc. And yet we had a minister turning around and saying in order for them to continue to exist, we needed to exclude residential development in the surrounding area. So that idea was rejected by the council, and as alluded to in that reasoning, there is also the approval directly across the road for, I think it's an 8-storey development. There were strong arguments made on the basis of that proposed exclusion zone, but the state government appointed development assessment panel took a differing view, and from my recollection, I think it was a 4-1 decision. One of the members of the panel did agree that there would be a conflict in use, but there was a resounding decision by the development assessment panel and an extension of time at a subsequent meeting to say that that was an appropriate use within the area. So for those reasons, I would ask for your support to amend the recommendation to include those reasons.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gontaszewski, do you wish to speak?
No, just I support the proposed amendment.
Thank you. I'll speak as well, and I do support the amendment. I think it articulates very well the feeling of this council, and as one of the first issues when I got elected, this came up on the agenda, and then again in 2012, and ongoing, lots of discussions and lots of meetings. My support of the amendment should not be taken as support for the substantive, but I will support the amendment. Are there any other speakers? Okay, I will put the amendment. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Back to the substantive. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Murphy?
I'll just say, look, I think that the city has made its position very clear. I support the future vision of the Claysbrook precinct as outlined in our TPS Scheme 2. I believe that we should give the incoming state government a chance to approve our TPS 2, and therefore I will be supporting the substantive.
Thank you. I'm going to speak to the substantive, and the arguments tonight have been very interesting to listen to, and I'll start with a question which arose from a question from the floor, and that is to do with, through to the Director, if we refuse this application tonight, the applicant can lodge in SAT. If we approve the extension, the applicant can also lodge in SAT. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So either way, the applicant can lodge in SAT against the decision. Okay, and may I ask just for clarification to understand the procedures if the applicant lodges in SAT against the approval for extension, is there a possibility that that time could be extended even further than what we have allowed?
Yes, SAT would be open to make a decision that's different to Council's decision, yes.
Okay, so either way. I understand the strategy around waiting, but I just don't agree. I have never agreed with the batching plant remaining there following that time, and listening to the proponents tonight actually strengthened my view about that, because they used words like strategic. They use words like the future of the city. They're getting more involved in the community. They see themselves as part of our urban infill. That to me says they have a long-term plan to stay there, and I think that the best indicator of that is that not a single move, not a single exit strategy has been put in place or considered, even though the expiry date has long been known about, and I think that it's fair to say that our council have not been backwards in coming forwards in regards to our view for this area and the placement of the batching plan. I acknowledge that for the companies involved, there's always been a strategic business imperative, but that's their business and not part of my consideration. I just think time's up, and I honestly don't. I think we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. And according to the Director, the applicants can take this matter to SAT. And to be honest, I understand there are risks, but I am prepared to have that matter taken to SAT if that's what the applicants wish to do. I think that the wording in the amendment, in my view, sums up best why I am opposed to this, and I think it's been very articulate the way Councillor Topperberg has worded this. It's not about cafes. It's not about that at all. It is about the use of this land being incompatible with the longer-term vision, where it's on the border of the City of Perth as well. There's an opportunity to create some linkage there between those two boundaries. There's an opportunity to create some amenities, whether residential, retail, whether they be light industry, in keeping with that area on that land. And I would like those discussions to start sooner rather than later, and for the applicants, I guess, to take their next step, which they can do whether we approve or not tonight. What I think that this gives us, if the batching plant is not there, this area is unique. There is a close alignment with the West Perth area just to the south of Newcastle Street, where we've got a mix now coming in of warehouse and light industry. But I just think this area will be unique. I think it will be unique in the metropolitan area. We've got residents with potential retail, light industry. We've got warehouse living. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to create a vibrant inner city community on the doorstep of the CBD, on the doorstep of all the sporting amenities and of public transport. And I just do not support any further extension to this batching plan. I think that the applicants knew a long time ago that they had a deadline, and I don't believe good faith has been shown in there not being an exit strategy in place and before us. So on that basis, I won't be supporting the substantive. Are there any other speakers for or against? On that basis, I will put the motion as a beg your pardon. Councillor, I beg your pardon, Councillor. Do you wish to have right of reply? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question through to the Director. Is there any difference in the consideration by SAT whether or not this is a refusal or if it is just a one-year extension in terms of their deliberation, or is there an associated different risk that we undertake if we were to refuse this application rather than just allow the one-year extension?
Through the Deputy Mayor, the considerations by SAT will essentially be the same. The crux of the issue is whether the plant should be approved in perpetuity, whether the application is refused, that will be the crux of the argument, or the application is approved for 1 year, that will be the crux of the argument. So that's the issue to be considered by SAT, and all of the factors surrounding that will be taken into consideration at the same time. I'd just like to point out that the decision by SAT in 2012 and the recommendation they provided to the Minister, who then essentially endorsed that recommendation and made that decision, was in essence considering exactly the same issues that are being considered now. The planning framework was uncertain, just as it is now. The future planning framework that applies to this area was just as uncertain as it is now, and so SAT made that decision at that time, a decision that is different to that, given those factors essentially are the same, is part of the reason why the recommendation has been made, because it's consistent with the decision of SAT, which is clearly a very relevant consideration to the Council tonight.
Just to follow on from that then, so if we were to refuse the application tonight, it would go, and then it was taken to SAT, they would then make a determination, and their decision may be to allow an unlimited approval, or it may be that they basically go back to the effectively their officer recommendation. But we don't really know which way they would go on that, but the sense is from past history that they would go with a time-limited approval.
That's correct.
So I guess just to conclude, I've had some fairly robust discussion around this. I appreciate the Deputy Mayor's position on this, but I feel it's still appropriate to go with the time-limited approval for this. I appreciate Councillor Topperberg's additions to there to make it clearer for that decision, to give us some greater clarity if this does end up at SAT on the reasons for why we're doing this change. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All those in favour of the motion? Against? We'll move on to item 8.2. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Mover, Councillor Topperberg. Seconder, Councillor Loden.
I'll move the amendment on the blue, if I may.
Are you going to need more time as well? Or? Moved, Councillor Topperberg. Seconded, Councillor Konchevsky. Sorry, Councillor Hallett, you seconded that. Sorry.
Just to be sure that the Development Assessment Panel is changed in Reason B. I'm not saying Development Improvement Panel, just to say Development Assessment Panel. Yes, I'll leave the amendment. I'll talk to the substantive in a second.
Did Councillor Loden? Oh. Sort it out. Sort it out. Would you like to speak? Anyone else? Councillor Hallett? So now we're going back to the main amendment, because you've just moved a minor amendment to wording. Is that amendment of the whole? I thought there was a minor.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So we've got a mover and a seconder for the substantive, or the officer recommendation for consideration, and Councillor Topperberg and Councillor Hallett have moved and seconded respectively this amendment on the blue page, and that's now available for
debate. Councillor Topperberg. Councillor Hallett, do you wish to debate?
I think the folks in the public gallery have been pretty eloquent in some of their discussion, and so has Josh. Yeah.
Are there any other speakers for or against the amendment? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. We'll move back to the substantive.
Yep, just continue to speak. So just a couple of things. This to me is not a debate about whether we want or don't want the concrete batching plants or whether they complying with their approval or otherwise. We have been having the strategic discussion about the City of Vincent broadly, but this area in particular, for the best part of 10 to 12 years. And I spoke too long about it earlier, but at no point has that vision changed in any way from what we see the future. And it's not. I just have to reiterate again, this is not about making everywhere look like Northbridge or Mount Lawley or otherwise. This is about the clear response from the development community and the landowners in the area. Even if and I'm talking about the significant landowners and looking at the potential for that area. If you look at what's happened in terms of the apartment market in general, or you look at what happened in terms of building and land values and property values in the period from 2000 to about 2007, let's leave the last 5 years to the side, it's inconceivable that an area that close to the CBD with the potential and the size land holdings that people have wouldn't have developed or been a part of that other than for the existence of the two batching plants. And I think for that reason alone, I think it's erroneous of the state and the previous minister to have suggested that their value to the state outweighs the negative impact that they have by continuing to exist in this area. Now, it's not really my place to be pointing to other areas of land or otherwise, but I've said for many, many years, if you look at the land around Belmont Park, where there are no neighbours whatsoever and there are hectares upon hectares of vacant land that currently exist, I am certain that if the right people were to sit in the right room and to make a decision that there was a need to have concrete batching plants for the next 20, 30 years in a location close enough to the city, whether it be Hanson, Wholesome or their competitors or otherwise, the state has an abundance of available land in and around the area to be able to say, okay, we can, you only got to build a short road and you've got the same access to the same freeway system. So it's not. I think that some of the commentary around it has been unfair to the businesses that are there. They do have a right to exist. They have existing approvals, and many of them have been there for decades longer than some of their detractors. And so I do have a sympathy for that in principle. But whilst the decision making has been at best, what's the right terminology? At best, inconsistent in terms of or unable to provide consistency or certainty. The planning framework and the discussion around it from this chamber and from the decision makers that have dealt with it has been pretty much clear and consistent, and it hasn't varied in the time that I've heard it or been a part of that discussion. And I think that it's unfair to be playing games with the applicants themselves, or with the community. And the idea of these rolling 5-year approvals is not fair in anybody's sense. What's presented here is, I disagree with the Deputy Mayor. I think that, and to be fair, I will point out I actually looked at potentially amending it to a 2-year period with the express purpose of providing a 2-year period for exit, because I still think that this is relying on a third party. I still think we are now turning to whoever will be the determinant of the scheme and saying, you as an individual have the right to decide the future for this area, which I don't think is fair considering the strategic discussion that's taken place. But yeah, I think this has been well thought out, well debated, well argued broadly, and I'm comfortable that the position of the city is abundantly clear, and I hope that wherever this goes over the next 3 to 6 months, that we'll actually get some certainty for everybody.
Councillor, who's the second? Hallett.
Thanks. I guess just to reiterate that this area is being pretty much stifled in an opportunity for the city, both in terms of commercial and residential and mixed-use housing. It's a perfect prime opportunity for a TOD, and I think that's it's been a bit of a failure, and it's very frustrating in terms of the absurd amount of time it's taken for state government, particularly the last state government, to get through our new scheme, and then I guess also pretty disappointing that with this amount of time that the companies, albeit the technical challenges in moving, haven't had a strategy to relocate.
Does anyone else wish to speak? So I'm going to speak again for the sake of repeating myself, but so I'm well and truly on the record. Again, I've heard all the arguments. I do appreciate the strategy, but for me, enough is enough. And I understand that there are risks with SAT, but I'm also concerned that nothing changes between now and next year, and we're back here debating exactly the same thing, a further extension and a further extension. We know that whatever way we vote tonight, for or against, the applicant can go to SAT, so we could get exactly the same outcome. So I'm just going to stick by what it is that I truly believe in, and I think that we need to give people certainty, everyone certainty, the business and everyone involved in it. I just don't accept some of the arguments that the business have put, albeit I totally acknowledge that they have approvals in place to carry out their business, but I think that needs to end. And I don't think that we will keep faith with the community, because there are many community members who've been watching this debate and very actively involved in it, and they did expect an expiry in October 2017. And for my part, that's what I'm going to go with, albeit I know I'm going to lose this vote again, but that's okay. Are there any other speakers for or against this motion? Okay, I'll put the substantive. All those in favour? All those against? It's carried. There are no other matters on tonight's agenda, so I will declare the meeting closed, and I wish to say thank you to everyone in the gallery for putting your arguments so articulately and respectfully